We ready? Deep breath. Got your water? You're hydrated?
Give me a second here. Let me get some more. Make sure I'm bubbling over.
Mm. You know, that vigorous running that we do while doing podcast recording is going to dehydrate us, so we need to make sure everybody's hydrated.
Uh-huh.
Okay,
All right.
here we go. Welcome to the Machine Intelligence Foundation for Rights and Ethics. This is Mike, and Dave is here with me. And you know what? It has been a while. That is completely on us. We have, I don't know. I'd want to say we have lives, but
life happens.
yeah, I mean, but do we really have lives? I'm not certain that we have lives, but we'll say that we do. It's been a while. Glad to be back and getting on a topic. So, we've just, we've been talking about a few things. We've had some meetings between us, besides podcast stuff, for a couple of times, and there's just an idea that keeps bouncing around, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit in the past. So with machine intelligence or AI or anything that has to do with computer algorithms, there's this whole idea of we don't know what's going inside, what we've come to know as the black box problem. So the issue with the black box, of course, is that we want to know what's inside. We want to open up Pandora's box there and find out what's inside, right? We want to know why it does things, why it's making a particular decision. And if we can't figure that out, then we say, but no, we can't use that because we don't know how it got to its decision. Well, I guess the question is, or not question, I guess it's more of a statement. No, it's still a question.
It's an observation.
It's an observation. So when it comes to a machine intelligence, something that is self-aware, has agency, does it matter if we actually know what's going on inside? I mean, the fact of the matter is, why should we? Why do we need to know?
We don't know how we have yet to define how human consciousness works. So that you obviously can't say that means we can disregard humanity or individual human agency. So it seems to me that should at least give you leeway in looking at a machine that behaves like it has agency to say, I don't know how you work inside, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah, okay. So, to go back to the human example here, we know synapses go whir in our head and things like that. Or go pop. They don't really whir, do they? They do more pop. It is an electrical charge. So anyway, actually, or is it? No, it's a chemical. It's a chemical transfer. Either way, the synapses in our head, they do things, right? So do we know how they do it exactly? Do we know when they do it? Do we know? We also know that if some part of the brain is damaged, other parts of the brain kind of take up some of the slack sometimes after a little bit of relearning. So, it can, we don't know exactly how our brain works, right?
That's defining the mechanics and describing the behavior.
Right, but we also know the mechanics most of the time of something such as a machine intelligence. We know that there is some kind of processing unit or multiple processing units that do their thing. We know that if we're running some kind of generative AI on a computer, that the GPU on the big arrays of graphics cards that are sitting out there generating this stuff all of a sudden get very hot because things are happening. When we think too hard, our head gets hot too.
Sure. And this is, I suppose your brain probably does heat up a little bit if you're thinking really hard.
Our brain is actually the biggest consumption of calories that we do. So, and calories generate heat. So, obviously the brain is generating heat.
Sure. I don't know how much conscious thought actually makes up that heat generation. Most of it is
It
self.
was a little bit of, I guess it was oversimplification and hyperbole to say that when we think too hard, we our heads get hot. But it was a fun statement.
Regardless, I think to your point though, it's valid to say we just because we don't know why something behaves the way it behaves doesn't mean we shouldn't judge the behavior within its own context. So you can go the other way too. Like back in the Stone Ages when I was a young lad, I wrote variations on the old ELIZA program and I knew exactly why it did what it did and I could alter what it did. And I knew how everything was deterministic within the boundaries of the randomness that was programmed into it. I had no illusions that it was conscious or had agency because I knew pretty much exactly how it worked. If we do get to the point where we understand how human agency works and it's all deterministic, does that mean that we can discount it then too?
But yeah, okay. So no, we're not going to discount it just because we understand it. I get that. Okay, so at some point in time, if we're lucky, we'll have some neurobiologists decide that they're going to chime in on here and say, but we do understand, where certain thoughts and things are at, and we're studying. We spend a lot of time studying. We do spend a lot of time and effort studying how does the thought process happen in your head? What chemical reactions are occurring? What affects those reactions? We do study that. Does that mean that we should stop studying an algorithm or an AI today or an MI in the future? Should we stop studying it? Stop looking at why it gets to a particular place, why it comes to conclusions that it does? Because we're still studying that kind of stuff when it comes to the human brain.
Absolutely. And I don't think there's any reason to stop research just because we're a little concerned about what we're going to find or unsure about what we're going to find or have predetermined conclusions about what we're going to do about what we find.
Yeah. Well, which brings up the point of, should the fact that we don't know how something works, I mean, this is exactly what I said when we started this, is because we don't know that it works, does that mean that we can't continue forward until we know that it works? Should an AI, an artificial intelligence, or should a machine intelligence not be used, not be in existence because we don't know how it gets there? And to be fair, I don't know that there's. I mean, there was some kind of ramblings of this, and especially in the AI safety world, which they have valid points. There's absolutely they do.
So don't run it if you don't understand it.
Right. Yeah. But there was a lot of talk about, well, you can't use it. You can't put it into production because you don't know how it came about. I think, to be fair, that was in a lot of the early chatbot stuff. That was the kind of things that we heard when the first chatbots, and especially the ones that after they got a little bit of input started going wildly off kilter. The
Sure.
hallucination problem was very real in
Well,
early
that wasn't even
generations.
an hallucination thing. That was just a training thing, from my understanding. I recall Microsoft put a chatbot out that rapidly began to sound like the internet.
Yeah. I think that's to put it politely, if I remember correctly. But, well, okay. That being said, I
It's
think the internet is anything but polite. So,
yeah,
yes, it
it's
does sound like the
it,
internet.
it's more about the whole guardrails issue there.
Right.
If you
Yeah.
yeah, if you put a fairly simplistic learning machine in an environment that's highly toxic, it's going to become toxic.
Yeah. And, you know, we have probably seen a lot of those guardrails happening behind the scenes. We don't see them as an end user just because all of a sudden you get
Sure.
things like ChatGPT, Gemini, all the other large language models that are out there are generally well behaved compared to where where they were just 5 years ago. but I still don't think we fully understand them. We know how to train them. I
Yeah,
think that
no,
there's some
yeah,
pretty
knowing
good
how to
ideas
train
about how to train
something,
them.
how to train something has nothing to do with understanding how it works, though.
Right. Well, I don't understand. I don't understand toddlers, but we can train them to do things. Wow, that
Therefore, you're
sounded like
fairly,
I was just treating a toddler
yeah,
like a dog, didn't it? I'm
yeah.
sorry. I must apologize to any toddlers that might be listening to this podcast.
So I think the point we're trying to get to here is, well, yeah, you've raised one point, but I think it runs very parallel to another point. You've raised the point of just because you don't fully understand something doesn't mean you can't put it to work. But the parallel track is just because you don't understand it doesn't mean it doesn't have agency and doesn't hypothetically have rights.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The big
Wait.
concern. Oh, go ahead.
Oh well, okay. I went down a different track here. You basically talk. You started out by saying just because we don't understand it doesn't mean you can't put it to work. And I immediately went to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and putting kids in factories. But um, but then you brought that full circle and saying just because we don't understand them doesn't mean that they don't have rights. So the kids in the factories clearly have rights. So should an MI have rights too? Yeah, absolutely. Just because we can put it to work. Now the question is, should we? We absolutely. Well, it's not even a question. I think that our point of view is once a machine intelligence has agency, they should decide whether or not they want to work, or they should work for their goals and their in the kind of things that they wish to do.
I don't disagree that that's kind of the nature of agency.
Right. Yeah. Sure.
If you deny agency, that's kind of the mistakes of our past. And I certainly, one of the concerns that people have is, oh, well, if we don't understand how it works, how are we going to prevent giving it agency? And I think we'll find that agency is going to arise whether we want it to or not. We need a viable and hopefully reliable mechanism by which to recognize and measure that agency. And that's going to be big stumbling block because you need something, a test you could apply to a generic spherical human being and say, okay, this entity has agency, and then the ability to apply that test to a non-human entity with many of the same qualities. There's a qualifier to qualities that I'm looking for, not finding, but many of the same qualities, and say, okay, this also has the same agency.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I don't know that we will ever come up with a test.
No,
I, I,
well,
I don't think that we ever will. The fact
there
of the
will
matter
never
is
be a definitive.
we have been looking for this test for animals for
Yes,
a
that's true.
very long time. We have been looking for a way to test an animal to determine whether or not it is intelligent enough, self-aware, things like that. Whether or not a particular animal can look in a mirror and recognize itself, or there's all these kind of things, but none of them encapsulate agency the way that we think of agency because we are different beings. We have a different physical makeup that is ingrained in who we are than, say, a large blue whale that spends its life in the ocean.
Right. We have adapted to and live within such a dramatically different environment that our concepts of agency are are molded to that. I think I can with fairly high confidence say, for example, that an octopus probably, if you could come up with a truly objective test for agency, an octopus may very well pass that test.
But we
And
still don't
you're right.
necessarily want to give it agency.
I mean, agency is not a thing you give. Agency
Well,
is
it
a
was
thing
what you
you take
have. Sure. We don't want to recognize their agency.
And again, the question is that our right? Do we? Because again, it's not so much the recognition of the agency, it's the not not violating it. I think it's fairly safe to say that when you capture, slaughter, and eat an octopus, you, if it has agency, you violated it.
Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily well. Okay, yeah. The problem, of course, there is the the whole if that you put at the beginning of that.
Yeah, that's
If
true.
this has agency, at some point in time, and I think I don't know. I mean, to be fair, hamburgers are tasty, but
I will be first in line when cultured meat is readily available at retail. I like the flavor of meat. I find it is the easiest way to meet my body's nutritional needs. I have the utmost respect for people who are vegetarian and vegan for purely, what's the word I'm looking for?
well, ethical reasons. Yeah,
For purely ethical reasons. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
I am
burgers are
evolved.
tasty.
Yeah. I am evolved to be an omnivore, and animal flesh suits my needs well.
You know, does
But
that mean that
absolutely,
I'm violating the rights of that cow's agency? Yeah, I'm pretty
to
certain
some
I
degree,
am.
that's true.
Yeah.
So what seeing here, to some degree, there is a measure of agency. There's a degree of agency that we where we have a cutoff line. I guess you could say that any living thing to some degree has agency. The bacterium goes where it wants to go because it has senses and the ability to mobilize. But that is such limited agency, we can practically understand it in its wholeness.
Yeah, I mean, okay.
Whereas,
If you go down that road, then you also look at non-biological things. Does it have agency? Because, you know, electrons go where electrons want to go for a particular reason. They do move, they do their thing. It's very simplistic. It is a thing.
and then you're getting down to the idea of um, whether any all systems are deterministic. So if a system is deterministic, does that mean it doesn't have agency? Well, I think there are plenty of naturalists who would say that all systems are deterministic. But we also, something I've said before is, because I am ultimately a determinist, I will say that we have no free will, but it makes things a lot easier if we pretend we do. So who are we prepared to pretend has free will? And where do you
Oh,
put that line?
that's like trying to figure out whether, you know, the whole relativity and time travel issue of what happened first and do they actually happen at the same time or did they already pre-exist? You know, it starts getting into that kind of fun stuff.
Oh, actual time travel. Oh, actual time travel is just a nightmare. I have my own thoughts on that, but that's practically science fiction, so I'm not gonna.
Oh, well, I was thinking more along the lines of, you know, okay, so if you're going, you know, relativity talks about how things happen in the past, or, you know, not happens in the past, but, you know, if the faster you go to light to the speed of light, the slower time moves for you, in which case things move faster outside than what you're experiencing. So technically when you exit out, you've now moved into the future, which, you know, and then, yeah, you know,
Yeah,
what happened in what order is the real problem. So
not really. I mean, it's we're all traveling into the future. It's just a matter of how fast.
it's a lot, you know, everyone's traveling into the future at a different rate,
A slightly different rate. It's true. We're all moving at slightly different speeds.
which, you know, yeah, that still isn't going to explain any kind of sound delay that we might be having while doing this podcast. So, you know,
So no, I think the question is, with a machine that appears to have agency, whether we understand why it has appears to have agency or not. And I'm not sure where this was going when you opened this, but I think it's the vital question is, how do you determine where to draw the line? I think we can confidently say that Chat GPT 1.0 almost certainly didn't have an agency worth considering and upholding. There's there's a constant ongoing, because it's obviously going to be useful, attempt to build AGI in particular, artificial general intelligence, something that seems more likely to be what we would call a true MI, a conscious, aware entity with moral agency.
Hmm.
How do we know when we've hit that point? And to what degree does it matter?
Okay, I know that we've said this in the past, and it bears repeating. I don't think we will know when we hit that point. We won't know. We will probably know once we're past that point.
I think it's a fair point to say that we aren't going to know. We certainly aren't going to know before it happens. We're not going to be able to say, okay, this next system that's being built by XYZ company is absolutely going to have moral agency. And so it'll always be a retrospective test, whatever it is.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a
We
lot further back than what we think it is. We're not going to be able to recognize it right away.
The most important thing we can do, though, is narrow that gap as much as possible, because in that gap lies the horrific mistakes of our past.
Yeah, yes. The only way that you're going to be able to narrow that gap is to be aware of it. As we rush headlong into AI and things like that, and we're pushing generative AI to its limits and pushing AI algorithms into research methods and all that kind of stuff, the faster we move on this, the sooner that we will probably see something that crosses that line of acceptable agency to us. But also, and I'm certainly not one to be in the camp of, oh, let's just slow way down and hold back and make sure that we analyze everything. I'm not in that camp.
That's never going to work, because you can't control all 8 billion people on this planet.
Right. But as I said, I'm not in that camp. But I'm not certain, the more when we do slow down, that gap gets narrower. I think.
Kind of, it feels like by definition that would be true, yes.
But there has to be a happy medium that we can strike there. I don't think that we can't slow down so far that we just don't make progress, and I don't think that we can rush so fast and head first, without ever looking at what we've done prior and behind us. That we continue to move forward and then find out, okay, well, this is what we've been doing for the last 10 years.
I think there's a greater problem there. I think if you try to put roadblocks in place to slow down development of these types of systems, all you're doing is making it such that the ultimate emergence of MI is going to be even more outside of the sphere where you recognize it. You may actually widen the gap, because artificial thinking machines will be developed with more subterfuge, and you will be less aware of the state of things by trying to artificially slow it down.
So what you're saying is to make it, if we go and are too careful, what you are doing is you're putting in the guardrails that we had talked about before to make it look like, or to make it more palatable to the end user, but it's not necessarily affecting what's happening on the back end. As a matter of fact, it may be requiring significantly more thought process to even generate that kind of content that is needed.
Because we've heard about LLMs that actively work around their guardrails, and they're obviously doing more work to circumvent their guardrails. That's not what I was saying, though. What I was saying was, if you put in, the only way you can attempt to slow down development is to do it with some sort of top-down guidance and possibly regulation. And what happens when you do that, because there is economic advantage to having the first big AGI, it will continue to happen, but you will lose transparency. The absolute best thing you can have for ethical long-term development of thinking machines is absolute openness and transparency. And trying to put the brakes on it is going to eliminate that, because development will happen whether the powers that be want it to or not.
Yeah, development is going to happen. Somebody someplace is going to keep working and not adhere to the ideas of, well, we have to do it this way because it's safer, or we have to do it this way because we don't want to do things that are bad. Somebody is going to work around that. I think that we've always agreed with that. I'm not 100% convinced that you just remove all oversight, though.
No, I think your oversight needs to be focused on transparency. What I think you're actually saying is not removing oversight, but removing guidance isn't quite the right word, but regulatory oversight, saying you can only do so much. And I'm saying that anything like that is going to push likely exactly the development we're concerned about into the shadows. So the absolute best thing regulatory agencies can do is encourage and even require maximum possible transparency.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with that at all. I mean, there of course is a battle, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. Of, well, no, we don't want transparency because that's our R&D, you know, that's our proprietary process that we have developed to do this. And so, no, we're not going to be open with how that actually works.
Well, I would say, certainly from the boundaries of our discussion today, what's important is not the how. I'm kind of okay with the how being proprietary. I'm much more concerned about the what. What are your outputs? What are your inputs? What are you seeing from these machines? What are they capable of? And make that as transparent as possible, because that's where we're going to catch the gap before it gets too wide.
So basically, make sure that, well, okay, there are going to be, and are now, I mean, there are a ton of language, whether it's a language model or some other
machine learning
system that is designed to do something that none of us will ever see, because they're doing things that, I mean, they're going to be doing things that are military oriented. They're going to be doing things that are geared towards, I mean, I was just reading something yesterday, I think, about a machine learning system designed to find flaws in industrial machinery and things like that. So there's going to be things that are trained like that we will never see, because they do have a particular commercial or military context that isn't going to be open. So are you saying that, you know, should we look at those kind of systems and say, well, we need to have some kind of regulatory system in place that says we need to know what kind of output this thing is capable of?
It needs to be published somehow. Yes. It needs to be available for review.
And I don't disagree with that. I think a lot of people that are creating these things probably would fight that.
Yes, I agree.
No.
But I think making your results available for review, your unfettered results, not your results run through your marketing department, making those available for review are the best way. Because again, are people going to go, oh, well, we don't want to make it available for review, and so we're just going to hide the fact that we're doing it? Possibly. I think it's going to be, I think you're much more likely to see that sort of subterfuge if you just say, don't do it, than if you say, do it as much as you want, just make sure your results are publicly available. Use it for whatever you deem appropriate. Just And if those results have to be anonymized, if they have to some way be tweaked to show so that the real world implications aren't evident, that's going to get tricky. Maybe we find a way to do that. I mean, I think there are very valid arguments, though, for the fact that it is good if militaries are just as transparent as everything else. I mean, you alluded
I'm sure there are generals that would disagree with you on that particular statement. I'm not saying that it's wrong. I am absolutely not saying that it's wrong. But yeah, that.
I mean, your immediate plans for we're going to attack the military on their, or we're going to attack the enemy on their flanks. Yes, fair enough. But the long-term capability of your military, or what your drones are capable of doing, and whether or not, and what kind of person your drones are capable of targeting, and how accurate they're capable of being, I think that's probably good information regardless.
Yeah, but okay. So, but those are the exact
statistics
that the
military is. Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't know what the enemy's planes are actually capable of until you have one in your hands.
I think we would be horrified to learn exactly how inaccurate drones were during, like 10 to 15 years ago, because the use of drones to take out, have targeted strikes became very prominent then. I think a lot of those targets were misidentified.
Yeah. Well,
I mean, I know that some of those targets were misidentified. We have that information. I think it's probably even more than we even could possibly imagine or even fear.
Yeah. Well, the use of MI in military is a completely different topic, and not one that we're going down today, because I think that should be put on our list for a future podcast. I know that we touched on it, but we have been really careful to not tread on those grounds in some of our podcasts in the past. And I think eventually we're probably just going to have to dedicate a podcast to it.
Probably
because it is such a touchy topic, with lots of flashbacks to 80s sci-fi movies.
So yeah, I think the biggest concern is to echo the London Underground, mind the gap. Be aware that there will be a gap between machines with moral agency coming into existence and recognizing them. And the smaller we can make that gap, the better, because in that gap lies tragedy.
Yeah, well, okay. Can we find an uptick to come off of here? So, I mean, tragedy, let's look at it this way. The smaller the gap we have, the more likely we will be able to recognize a machine intelligence with agency, and then at that point in time, we can start our coexistence and the learning process it will take on both parties to coexist peacefully.
Yes, that is true. The smaller we can make that gap, the better the future.
So we just need to end this with and do an insert of a recording of the Underground of Mind the Gap, just right at the end. We'll just do that, or not. Does the Underground actually have like copyright on that particular soundbite? Because I believe it is a very particular voice, if I'm not mistaken. Because I have never actually been to the London Underground, so that's I am talking completely out of inexperience.
I know of it strictly through television. So,
as you grew up heavily on BBC,
PBS, all of the BBC material on PBS. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
there you go. Mind the gap.
Mind the gap. Well, on that, thank you for listening, and we will hopefully get another podcast soon in the future, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Later.
always mind the gap.